Hello. So, this is going to be an important podcast, important episode. And I think that before we start, it's important to know the background under which we're having this conversation. So, few months ago, the evolutionary biologists Bret Weinstein and Heather Heying, who rose to fame during the evergreen crisis, started propagating what I consider to be harmful misinformation about vaccines. Now, we're not having these conversations in bad faith, which is to say that I sincerely believe that vaccines are useful, and I sincerely believe that what they're doing is the misinformation that they're spreading is harmful. Neither my guests nor I am engaged in bad faith. In fact, I've had good things to say about Bret before, and I would love to have him on my show, though it's unlikely. Having said that, I think that the way I want this conversation to proceed is sort of taking their claims, steel manning them, and sort of letting my guest respond. That being said, welcome, Yuri Deigin.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So, like I said, I want this conversation to go, as a sort of tackling the misinformation about vaccines. So, let's start with some of the claims. So, I'm going to provide you with some of the claims that the Weinsteins have made, and you're going to tell me why they're wrong or right. So,
Do you want to maybe give a little background to the viewers, what maybe my relationship is with Bret and Heather, and just basically how, like, why you invited me on the podcast? Do you think that'd be all right?
Why don't you give the background, because I think you'd be in a better position to do that.
Yeah, sure, it'd be my pleasure. So basically, I've known Bret since last year, since around May last year, when he reached out to me after they read my Medium article on the lab leak hypothesis of SARS-CoV-2, which basically they claim turned them on to the lab leak hypothesis. Initially, they were skeptical, as have been countless others, before they kind of read my article, and that opened up their eyes to the possibility that actually that's not a crazy conspiracy theory, but is a valid hypothesis. And after which, Bret has invited me on their podcast. I've been a guest a couple of times where we explored the hypothesis in great detail, explored my arguments for it. And since then, Bret has been kind of the champion of the lab leak hypothesis. And he's been on, countless podcasts with Joe Rogan, been on Bill Maher and many others on TV. And so he's like the lab leak guy now. I think in large part thanks to my Medium article. And he, acknowledged that many times in his episodes, which he had a lot of episodes where he either mentioned the lab leak hypothesis, or the lab leak hypothesis has been some kind of a cornerstone of some of his subsequent thinking on, say, I don't know, what's the best way to treat COVID, or whether, like, one of the things he said early, that it doesn't make sense to stay indoors because probably, like, SARS-CoV-2 wouldn't transmit outdoors because it was passaged in the laboratory. And to Bret, it somehow made sense that, probably outdoors it has a much lower chance of being transmissible, based on his now newfound belief in the lab leak origin of the coronavirus, and many other countless hypotheses that he then propagated in terms of COVID. One of them being now the Ivermectin being a treatment for it. But I won't get into that. Like, basically, our relationship with Bret has always been, very positive. Or my relationship towards him, I greatly respected him for giving me the voice and being kind of the champion of the lab leak hypothesis since then. But I guess maybe a couple of months ago, like 3 months ago, Bret suddenly started. Well, no, even before, to be honest, I didn't really pay attention to their podcasts, but because they had like besides the lab leak to them was mostly like a diversion. They were on like other like social justice issues, and as soon as like the George Floyd thing started, Bret has jumped onto this kind of the racial problems in the United States, and he had like different people being brought on his podcast talking about like what's the best way forward and blah blah blah. Like, and like to me that's just not an interesting topic, so I kind of stopped paying attention to what Bret and Heather have been doing in their podcasts. And then eventually I kind of rediscovered that all of a sudden they're now like very hesitant about vaccines, and they think the vaccines have been developed, which I think is a marvel of modern technology, modern pharmacology, that they're so efficacious and they've been developed with lightning speed. I don't think we've ever witnessed this like such triumph of our science and technology of having developed a vaccine against a novel virus in less than a year. Not just developed, but like created, tested in animals, tested in humans, validated safety in hundreds, in tens of thousands of people per vaccine, and in hundreds of thousands of people clinically tested safety and efficacy overall in less than a year, and deployed in December. It was deployed, first vaccines were deployed in December of last year. The outbreak happened in December of the previous year, and we only kind of learned the genome in January. So this is a marvel of modern technology. And kind of hearing Bret being so concerned about like some small safety signals, small in comparison to the number of people vaccinated, like hugely small in comparison to the dangers of COVID, which, if you're trying to evaluate, the possibility of should you do a vaccine, should you use a vaccine or should you not, it shouldn't be evaluated in a vacuum. It should be evaluated towards the risk that the vaccine is meant to prevent you from dying from COVID or from getting long COVID and so forth. So to hear Bret all of a sudden become what I thought was, I'll be blunt now, like anti-scientific. Like there's no need to be polite anymore because we've pretty much said whatever we think. Bret called me a jerk, and I think Bret is turned out to be much less competent on the various questions of pharmacology, drug development, just basic biology, data science, than I've given him credit for. And I mean, I didn't investigate his abilities before going on to his past podcast about the lab leak hypothesis. And in discussing the lab leak hypothesis, he seemed okay because really he didn't offer any of his opinions other than just questioning my opinions or getting like the background of molecular biology from me. What I think, is indicative of potential genetic engineering, whether like the red flags about the SARS-CoV-2 genome or whatever. So I never really got to hear what Bret thinks or how qualified Bret or Heather are on the matters of molecular biology or even evolution. He didn't mention his telomeres hypothesis like on the first time we discussed it on the podcast, the lab leak hypothesis back then. And even then, I was like, huh? But I didn't really question it back then. Like it sounded very amateurish even back then, but like it wasn't my place to challenge him on that way back. So because I know a lot about telomeres. I've been in the aging science for not 7 years at least, 5 years, like molecular biology. I have like telomere, hypothesis of aging. I've investigated back and forth. I've investigated the telomerase therapy of Liz Parrish, BioViva, of Telosite, Michael Fossel. Like I know about telomeres, and when I know about mice, I know about different animals and the dynamics of telomere shortening and who has longer telomeres, who has shorter telomeres. And basically hearing Bret say that, in 2002, I discovered this huge red flag about lab mice versus wild type mice. To me, that was like, what? You sure about that? Okay, whatever. Let's talk about lab leak hypothesis. And now him bring it up again in the context of, I distrust all pharmaceuticals on the market because they've been tested on mice. And I've discovered in my work in 2002 that lab mice somehow have longer telomeres, and that means all drugs haven't been completely, verified they're not toxic. Now that to me now sounds completely ridiculous. So I couldn't just, pass up the opportunity to comment on that. But yeah, I'm sorry, I get on tangents. Like I start talking about one thing.
Yeah,
And
that's.
feel free to interrupt.
I think we'll talk about all of that in detail.
Right.
But
So basically,
just,
sorry, I'm trying to
yeah.
provide the context. And just to finalize the context. So basically, after the lab leak interaction, I heard this about Bret saying things about vaccine. And then I realized that he's saying that not on isolation, but because of his belief in ivermectin's magical efficacy of both treatment and prophylaxis. And I kind of challenged him a bit on this, first on Twitter, then privately in email, like back in May. And he was very dismissive and evasive, and eventually like that conversation died down. But he kept going like with greater and greater volume about like how this is a conspiracy, man. Like they're trying to suppress ivermectin. They're trying to push vaccines on us. They're so unsafe. They accumulate in the ovaries, or at least he's not challenging the guests that he brings on his podcast. They're saying these stupid things that, oh, the ovaries, the peaks in the ovaries. Like, it doesn't peak in the ovaries. You dismiss like 3 other tissues from your graft that have like 16 times more of the concentration. So hearing all these very wrong things, I'll try to be polite. I'll try to refrain from saying what I completely think. I couldn't stay silent. And when Claire Berlinski, who also could not have stayed silent, hearing all this stuff, and hearing it not just in a little Twitter space, but being promoted and going on Joe Rogan with emergency podcast, like there's a conspiracy, they're killing us.
We'll title this the emergency podcast.
Sorry?
We'll title this the emergency podcast.
I don't know. I don't want to play that game. But yeah, basically she couldn't stay silent. She reached out to Bret saying, like, would he respond to a written critique of what Claire thought were his erroneous opinions. And once I saw that Bret said, yeah, he'll respond, I offered to also, provide my thoughts on what exactly is erroneous in Bret's claims. And so we teamed up with Claire and put out this Colette piece on, why basically everything that we think is wrong with Bret's messaging, coming to basically his messaging could kill a lot of people if they trust him, because those claims that you shouldn't take a vaccine because there's this wonderful ivermectin might lead to a lot of people trusting that bullshit and taking ivermectin instead of taking a vaccine, and ultimately that will lead to a lot more deaths than could have been avoided if those people didn't hear or didn't listen to Bret's messaging. So the Colette piece was a little bit I don't know. When I said we might be jerks, I was actually a little bit exaggerating. I don't think we were being jerks. We were being very calling out Bret, like, yeah, this is like, I don't remember exact words, but I don't think it was a hugely personal attack, other than the attack on the messaging and the way that he's being promoted those messages. But Bret felt that, I was being a jerk and blah, blah, blah. And that kind of, I guess, and I mean, he then challenged me that he's going to provide a response on Monday's podcast. And I thought he was actually inviting me on the podcast to debate this face to face. And they said, no, you're a jerk. And I don't want to, I'm not inviting you to anything. And then he just put out this podcast with Heather on Monday, which was ridiculously incompetent. And it's so great that they put it out, because it lays bare the degree to their incompetence in molecular biology, drug development, data analysis, what have you, that it's wonderful that critically thinking listeners, once they actually listen to that podcast, will realize just how bare the emperor is, the emperor and the empress. They have so little competence that listening to them wax poetic about ivermectin, vaccines, or even evolution, I think is, not going to get you very far if you're a listener. So that's the background. Now, personally, I still think Bret is a great guy as a communicator, as maybe a professor. Like, he can take ideas of others and summarize them in ways that can reach, yeah, exactly, the audience that is not necessarily well versed in the science, but he can get the message across. But critically thinking on his own and comparing two different hypotheses based on incomplete data, which we are right now in pandemic. He just doesn't have the enough knowledge of drug development, or how do you assess drug efficacy, which trials can you trust, which trials you shouldn't trust, how what are the even theoretical possibilities of what could be happening in your body with a small molecule, basically. And he thinks he does. That's like the Dunning-Kruger part. Like, he thinks he's so qualified, and I don't think he's been challenged maybe at all in his life on the scientific side as he has been until now. So that, like, I think to him this is like a complete shock that he could be wrong, and he's just like not realizing this. And I think it's like we have to challenge it. If it wasn't on this topic that can lead to a lot of people being killed, I think nobody would challenge him, and I would certainly let him be and leave him happily exist in his delusional state of that he's such an expert. But given that this is so important that he's going around and reaching these hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people with this messaging that vaccines are dangerous, ivermectin is better, that I think we can't be silent, and we must challenge him as vocally as possible, and maybe as provocatively as possible, so he actually hears us rather than ignores me for 2 months just because I was being polite. Oh, Bret, what do you think? Are you sure like 18 hours is half-life is for a weekly dosing is a scientifically valid assumption? It's like, oh yeah, it's 18 hours. 18 hours, he told me. I'm like, 18-hour half-life, and he's like, half-life 18 hours, as if like, dude, do you know what half-life means? It means every 18 hours it's decreased in half. So within 4 days you're left with 1% of the original dose. Maybe you don't know math, so don't pretend that you do. So yeah, I mean, I've had it being nice and polite and not seeing him hearing me. So I guess I was. You think I'm a jerk? I'm fine with it. Yeah. So
yeah,
that's the background. That's enough of a podcast. Like we can probably just stop right there. But
I think
so whatever. How questions?
I think that the problem with the way he's presenting is, you've said that he hasn't reached million. I just checked. He has, in fact, one of his videos spreading this vaccine misinformation has exactly 1.7 million views or something. It has been before it was taken down from YouTube. So he's reaching vast audiences, and he's doing very harmful things. And because the way he sounds, because to a non-scientist, what he's saying, he sounds sciencey, and it sounds very convincing. And
so like the tone, that's the professor that you trust, and that's it's so funny that that's mastery of the delivery is like so important, but is so disconnected from the mastery of the underlying message. And yeah, he's great at communicating, and I'll give him that. But anyways, you're correct, and I think one of the videos actually like 5 million views before it was removed. So yeah, it's a lot of people.
And he's in Joe Rogan's podcast. Like, that's the biggest podcast in the world. So he's reaching there. So it is very harmful. And I think what we need to do is talk in his language, take his claims and take it apart and tell the audience why exactly is wrong. So in Tucker Carlson's episode, when he went on Tucker Carlson, so he said that
Tucker, man.
But keeping the politics aside, he did say that
no, I don't know about the politics. I don't care about the politics. Like, all I know about Tucker Carlson is when I watched I used to watch CNN 20 years ago when I cared about politics. Tucker Carlson was on CNN, and I'm like, I'm seeing now him on Fox News. I'm like, whoa, what happened to you, dude? And now he's like, yeah, all in about this vaccine misinformation, and like, anyways, yeah.
He's completely conservative now. So,
yeah, well, I mean, I don't care about politics.
Weinstein
killing people. Yeah.
In that podcast that selection pressure will cause escape variants, which in turn are going to make the pandemic worse. The vaccines that we're giving, essentially are going to make the viruses stronger, and they're going to develop some immune response, which will in turn lead to more dangerous variants development. Why is this wrong?
Right. So the funny thing is, like, this is not Bret's idea. This is the idea of Gert van den Bosch, or at least he's one of the biggest proponents of this idea. And actually, there's a whole cluster of ideas created like around this that Bret now champions. And it's funny thing about Bret that he often will take someone else's ideas and make them his own, and then go around basically spreading them. I think to a degree that happened with the lab leak hypothesis, like how he started going around Joe Rogan and other podcasts, and he never actually mentioned my name once, or any other, I don't know, Rossana Segredo, my co-author, that he wanted to bring on the podcast. So, he never mentioned us, neither there nor on Little Meyer or anywhere else, which I thought was like a little bit like weird, but he does this. But then at least all of the bad stuff that comes back, he gets it too. So like in this case, he's promoting this crazy idea of Gert van den Bosch about this, first of all, vaccine causing hugely increased selection pressure that will breed these novel variants that all will be just escape mutants and will completely escape the vaccine immunity or natural immunity, because natural immunity is also really developed mostly on the spike protein, because that's the biggest antigen that the immune system sees, and it's the most important antigen, the spike, because that's how you develop neutralizing antibodies. Like this is the part that's external on the virus, and only external part of the virus is visible to antibodies. All the other stuff is within the virion, and antibodies can't get in there. So to neutralize the virus, neutralization means you prevent the virus from entering your cell and starting to replicate. This is the most important part, like the most important thing the immune system can do. First of all, to spread the infection quickly, and second, to not let you get sick. Because just because the virus gets inside your body doesn't yet mean it's harmful, because it actually has to get inside the cell. And this is the great thing, well, not great thing, but this is one of the big things about the bad viruses that they find in rural China, and they go and sample the blood of farmers who live near the bat caves, and they discover, oh my God, these farmers have been exposed to bat viruses, because we find antibodies to some proteins, constituent proteins of the bat viruses. But that doesn't mean the virus actually was able to get inside human cells. It doesn't mean the farmers were infected. The virus could have gotten in their body, but it most likely didn't get into their cells. And the immune system doesn't care. Like macrophages will eat up the virus even in your, I don't know, nasal cavity or within the lungs, or in your gut mostly. Actually, most of the immunity happens in your gut, because that's how most of the stuff you get into the body. And our immune system cells will deconstruct whatever the pathogen it finds and create epitopes on which it will create antibodies, or teach T cells or the memory cells to later recognize it. And actually, funny thing, the virus that they used in those studies in China, that was proven that virus does not bind to human receptors, so it can't enter human cells, but we can still get antibodies to it. So basically, to come back to the actual point I was trying to make about neutralizing antibodies, is that the spike that's why they made the vaccines just based on the spike protein, because that's enough to prevent to help the immune system prevent the virus from infecting you. Because if the antibodies can bind to the spike on the actual virion, they'll stop it from getting inside your cells, and that's problem solved. Virus does not enter cells. Virus gets degraded from inside your body within, I don't know, a couple of days, gets removed. You never get sick. Of course, some small percentage of the virus could still get into the cells, but the T cell immunity will then just take care of it very easily. You won't even notice it. So and the argument of Gert van den Bosch that somehow these antibodies we generate on the spike will outcompete like natural IgM antibodies that he thinks are like the biggest defense our body has against SARS-2, which is very silly because those are non-specific IgM antibodies. Why he thinks that they can bind very well to the spike is beyond me. And I mean, he has his ideas, but yeah, like that, like those points, they were deconstructed. Gert van den Bosch's points deconstructed by many people way before me, and there's at least like 2 good papers on this that I cite in my Medium article on vaccines. That I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it. But coming back to the evolutionary argument, why Bret or Gert might think that vaccines can breed new variants. Basically, from what I understand, their logic is this, that by deploying vaccines and the vaccines being imperfect, like they don't have 100% effectiveness at preventing infections, basically, okay, they have 95%, which means that, for every infected person who's been vaccinated, there's at least 20 people who haven't. So there's a huge, like vaccines are hugely effective. It decreases your chances of catching the virus by 20%. Like if our goal is to decrease the R0 of the virus, the reproductive number of the virus from, I don't know, initially was 2 for the first SARS, but with the Indian variant, it could be like as high as 8, but still, like we're decreasing it by 20 times. That should be enough to eradicate COVID. This is the main purpose of vaccinations. Like right now, like with a new virus, the main purpose of vaccinations is to get herd immunity high enough so that we break the transmission chains and we eradicate virus once and for all of the strains, and don't give it any opportunity to develop new strains. That's why we have to act quickly. And so he thinks that because we're deploying these vaccines, we're putting pressure, evolutionary pressure on the virus to create novel variants. And I mean, this is wrong on several levels. First of all, like if this was in a vacuum where you were evaluating as an evolutionary biologist, like the dynamics of 2 systems where, there's this one universe where you didn't have the vaccines and you have another universe where you have vaccines, but all the other things being equal, like the number of people that the vaccines, that the virus infects and what have you, then yes, the evolutionary pressure provided by vaccines could stimulate the variants that could arise to circumvent this, the immunity generated by vaccines. But again, only if all things are being equal. But in this case, things are not equal. The vaccine greatly diminishes the ability of the virus to create novel variants. How are novel variants created? They're created in a human in which the virus has the opportunity to mutate. The mutation rate is fixed. It does not depend on vaccine, no vaccine. It's an inherent property of the viral RDRP. RDRP, RNA-dependent polymerase. Anyway, my brain is drawing a blank. So we basically the thing that copies the virus, and it has an inherent error rate, which will generate mutations, statistically speaking, at a very precise percentage of the number of replications. Per each replication cycle, there's a chance that there'll be a mutation. How big is the chance? It's pretty low, considerably, like on the level of considering different viral species. Coronaviruses are somewhere in between like the flu, which is a little bit, and other viruses. But basically, what we know from empirical evidence is that the coronaviruses accumulate about 2 novel mutations per month. Like this pandemic, this virus, SARS-CoV-2, is getting about 2 mutations per month. 2 new nucleotides out of 30,000 nucleotides. It gets only about 2 new mutations per month in the hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people that it infects every month. So every month there's like millions of new infections, gazillions of virions enter people, start replicating in gazillions of cells, and the mutation rate is low enough that we only get, a couple of mutations fixed, a couple of nucleotides fixed per month. So it's not a huge mutation rate by any stretch. And so basically the question is, how can vaccines stimulate or create new variants? Obviously, they can't create anything because they don't affect the mutation rate. All they can do is that they can basically take out all the naive, non-exposed people from the pool of new infections that the new virus, like new strains.
To steal his point, I think what he's describing is vaccine escape, which is when viruses mutate to form resistance to the response of the immune system that is induced by the vaccines. So I think that's what I think that's what he's talking about.
Sure, but he somehow thinks that the vaccines actually induce or create novel variants, induce the virus to start finding those things, and they do not. All they do is in isolation, novel variants in the presence of vaccines, novel variants that previously probably would not be able to outcompete the wild type, or wouldn't be necessary for the virus to keep procreating, because wild type is good enough, and novel variants will arise, it'll infect someone else, but the novel variant is probably not that highly more adapted, not that highly better fit.
Also, it's extremely unlikely. It's very rare.
Right. So but now he's saying, oh, but you took away all of the people before that the wild type would have been able to basically outcompete the new novel strain you took it out. And so now only the novel strain will have the ability to keep procreating, because it basically will be able to break through previous immunity that has been created by either vaccines or previous infections. And, again, in isolation, that argument is valid, but the point being that you took away so many new people from the virus to actually being able to experiment and create novel variants, that net vaccines greatly diminish the ability of the virus to create new variants. Because, as I said, it only depends on the mutation rate, which is fixed, the number of people in which the virus gets to experiment with, create mutations, and time. Basically, it's a time-driven thing. The more time the virus has, the more opportunity it has to create novel variants. 2 new mutations fixed per month. So if you take away millions, or by now billions of people, 3.5 billion doses of vaccine administered to, I think it was 2.5 billion of people in total, 1 billion double dose, and so I guess 2.5. Anyway, my math right now is, but billions of people you took away from the virus to experiment, and even the breakthrough variants that we have right now, they've been developed before vaccines have been rolled out, and even though the immunity is worse of vaccine immunity, or the previous immunity is worse towards the novel variant, especially the Delta variant, it's still pretty good. And we're still decreasing the ability of the virus to survive in the human population. And this is really what matters. To eradicate COVID, we need to greatly diminish its ability to be transmitted from one person to the other. And this is what vaccines are doing. And as I said, overall, net, they're extremely decreasing the opportunity of novel variants to be created by the virus. So whatever evolutionary pressure Bret thinks vaccinations could be putting on the novel variants to keep the virus surviving, all of the opportunities to do so that vaccines are taking from the virus away are many orders of magnitude greater than basically any benefit that vaccines are providing to the virus, benefit in putting in evolutionary pressure on it. So in a nutshell, I think that argument is completely over, like on its head, that the vaccines somehow are helping the virus. They're not helping the virus at all. The vaccines are what is going to help us kill the virus.
They're stopping the transmission of the virus. They're interrupting the transmission of the virus, which will eventually decrease the risk. This is not to say that vaccines are not perfect. What we are saying is that the protection offered by the vaccines is greater than the risks or cost associated with it. Now, another argument that they posed in that how to save the world episode is that I think it was Steve Gers who claimed, he said he took the data from the Pfizer study that the lipid nanoparticles collect concentrate on the ovaries and the bone marrow, which will lead to adverse effects, blood cancer, and toxicity. So
Yeah.
I read the PMDA paper, and I found that the paper states that the lipid nanoparticles concentrate mostly in the area where the dosage is given, like 57% or something. So I don't know where he got the data from, and
I can tell you
he
where
said,
he got the data.
And tell me.
I mean, he got it from the common technical document on, well, he claims it from the Japanese health agency, but I mean, it's pretty much the same as the European health agency, where it summarizes, that common technical document summarizes pretty much everything that was done to the vaccine to confirm its safety and efficacy, first in animals, then in humans. And of course, they do pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics. They have to study what the hell happens to every new drug that you put in a human or first in an animal. Where does it go? Where does it accumulate? Does it accumulate? How it gets excreted? And what's the metabolism? And blah, 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 blah. This is like drug development 101. Everybody with like even a passing familiarity with it knows that this is what's done. And again, everybody with a passing familiarity of pharmacokinetics or pharmacology knows that when you inject something, when you eat something, when you put something in your nose, it does not stay there. It gets absorbed in the blood, and it gets all around the body. It gets to all the tissues, including the brain. I mean, small molecules, pretty much all small molecules pass the blood-brain barrier. Lipid nanoparticles, to some extent do that as well. That they've been studied for 20 years as a technology. They've been, assessed. How dangerous is it? How many cells, like how well do they pass the blood-brain barrier? What's their tropism to like the neurons, the astrocytes, other cells? Which organs accumulate lipid nanoparticles, or at least the lipids, because the nanoparticles themselves can be broken apart, and lots of things happen in the body to anything you put into it. So you actually trace the lipids. You put radioactive carbon into the constituent parts of whatever the molecule you're studying. If it's a small molecule, you replace 1 or 2 carbons with radioactive carbons, and you trace the radioactivity to actually figure out where the hell does it go, what tissues does it go, what's the dynamics of its metabolism, excretion, and so on. You do the same with lipid nanoparticles. They put like specialized lipids with radioactive tags, and then they assess what the hell happens. And so to hear someone say it doesn't stay at the injection site should, ring alarm bells like, how much do you know about drug development? Obviously, it's not going to stay in the injection site, although most of it does. That's the point of intramuscular injections. You actually do it so it doesn't, like, not a lot of it goes into the bloodstream. If you want a lot of it going into the bloodstream, you do IV. If you want it to be, absorbed slowly, you do it per ounce. So you have, various pegylated or like slow release stuff if you want it to be released slowly, and like so many things, so many tricks now that we in drug development have if we want something to be metabolized quicker or metabolized slower. And for the vaccine, they've come up with some optimum that they want it to be, injected in the muscle, transported into the lymph nodes, where a lot of the like immune training happens. And of course, part of it will get all over the body. Not great, not like ideal, but also not terrible, because they've assessed, okay, we noticed the signal in the ovaries. that concentration is pretty high, you know, like, okay. Dosage wise, it's only 0.1% of the total dose of the vaccine. But like on the concentration wise on the tissue, like basically tissue size versus how much got into it. Okay, it's a signal we should double check, and they did double check. The people who were, you know, tasked with assessing safety of new drugs have been doing this for decades, if collectively for I wouldn't say 100 years, but probably less. So they actually look at the ovaries. Okay, we've seen this accumulate in the ovaries. Let us examine the ovaries. Are they exploding with lipid nanoparticles? No, their histology is normal, morphology is normal. The actual reproductive, okay, let's double check that the reproductive function is okay. Let's run a separate trial in animals, make sure that, you know, basically that reproduction is not affected. And they did it. And it's in the same report. Just, you know, scroll a little bit further down and read it. No, reproductive function not affected. Ovary morphology not affected. But Steve Kirsch, being, you know, his pool guy got sick, so it must be very bad. So he had this graph where he omitted like 3 or 4 other tissues that had higher concentrations of these lipid nanoparticles. First and foremost, the injection site, which had 16 times the concentration that he found in ovaries, adrenal glands, liver, spleen, he omitted them. And so he made that graph where, you know, ovaries are like, it peaks in the ovaries. No, it doesn't peak in the ovaries. If you actually put in the injection site, the ovaries will be like on the bottom. You won't even like be able to discern the ovaries from the other dozen other tissues where it is also found, the lipid nanoparticle. So yeah, that's where Steve got in the graph, and he wasn't challenged on it by Bret. He wasn't challenged on it by the inventor of mRNA technology, Dr. Robert Malone, who, like, dude, did you hear what they're saying? It doesn't stay in the injection site. You're the guy with, I don't know, like the pedigree of drug development. Why didn't you tell them, like, oh, you know, it's what actually usually happens. Things don't stay in the injection site. And if you studied the same report, don't you remember that the ovaries are not the tissue where stuff peaks, like by far? Why did it, like, nobody challenged each other? It was just, you know, a
Love
echo
fest.
chamber of people, yeah, reinforcing wrong ideas, and I think like really enjoying the scaremongering that they're like giving their viewers. Oh, I'm so sorry. I let my teenage daughters get vaccinated, says Steve Kirsch, who's also vaccinated himself, and as Robert Malone is vaccinating himself, because I don't know why, but I'm just afraid of, you know, the ovaries now. Anyway,
so you're essentially saying that the graph was misleading because they were not included certain data, that the concentration site was not included.
And that's what I said a number of times on Twitter. I called him out. I called Steve Kirsch out. I called Bret out. Like, this graph is misleading. And crickets. No. Like, and then I posted an excerpt from the very same document saying that they actually, because they claim like the stupidest stuff. Robert Malone and Steve Kirsch, like, oh, they didn't test the vaccine on animals before testing it in humans. What? And I put in like the excerpt from the document in the tweet that I called out Steve Kirsch with that stupid graph. I'm like, and then they tested reproductive toxicity in follow-up studies, found no abnormalities, and found that reproductive function is not affected. And Steve Kirsch like replied to that tweet with reference ? It's the same document that you got the graph from, dude. Did you not read it? So I put in the reference to him, and again, crickets, like no reaction. He just, you know, dismissed it because I don't know why. I guess he's not after finding out the truth, but he's after, I don't know, getting fear mongering off of YouTube. I don't know what he gets off on, but obviously it's not figuring out the truth.
Now, another thing that has been contentious is ivermectin. So
yeah,
I have mixed views on this because on one hand, ivermectin is prescribed in patients, ivermectin, fluvoxamine, all of these Fluvoxamine is an antidepressant, but it has shown some evidence of efficacy in like non-randomized trials. But what Brett and Heather are doing is promoting it as an alternative to vaccine. And I think that is where the main problem lies, because they claim that ivermectin can bind to spike protein. So I like that is clearly that.
Yeah,
I think
that in
that
itself is very silly, but yeah, even like they
well,
claim,
it
oh, we
comes
don't know how it
from a
works.
paper. It comes from a paper by Lehrer and Weinstein,
It's some
and they
bioinformatics
claim
paper.
that.
Yeah, it was just computer modeling that they did. And it's funny because yeah, I also had, the Twitter thread on this because I showed that in their paper, yeah, basically they do computer modeling of binding of a small molecule to parts of the spike protein and also the ACE2 receptor, or ACE2 as some people call it. And it's funny because it binds to both. It can bind to the ACE2 receptor and it can bind to spike protein. And in the spike protein, it actually binds to the NTD, N-terminal domain, basically, which it's not involved, at least not directly involved in the binding with ACE2 receptor. The receptor binding domain is much further down than the place where they think the ivermectin might bind. So that's one thing that's like, if you think that, ivermectin is preventing the spike from binding to our receptor, that to me, that's a very weak logic that you found that it has a binding site, how many, 200, 300 amino acids down from the receptor binding domain. Like it's a small molecule. It's smaller than a single amino acid residue on the protein. So you think binding, it binds, I don't know, like what, does it change the conformation of the entire spike protein so much that you think it all of a sudden can prevent it from binding ACE2 receptor? Very improbable logic. One thing. The other thing, they claim it binds to the ACE2 receptor. Wait a minute. Didn't you say that's like bad because the spike is toxic because of it? Like the study from out of the Salk by Yuri Manner's lab showed that, spike protein, or at least HIV particles or lentiviral particles pseudotype with the SARS-CoV-2 spike, when they bind to ACE2 receptors, they can mess up the signaling, the angiotensin, whatever, the system signaling, and have some kind of other problems. So now your magic bullet ivermectin is actually shown to also bind to ACE2 receptor, and you think that's okay, and you're not concerned? Double standard much? No? So anyways, but even so, that paper, it only, from what I understand, it only checked those two. I don't know, did it check any other, like maybe like small molecule is
only
pretty
checks
promiscuous.
the leucine 91 of the spike protein and histidine 378 of the AC2 receptor.
Yeah, small molecules can bind to like gazillion different other things. You have to like check. You have to have at least like some kind of negative control in your study. And again, this is just a weak molecular docking in silico study that does not very weakly elucidates the potential mechanisms of action. And I'm not even sure there is a mechanism of action of ivermectin being in any way efficacious in against SARS-CoV-2 like itself.
What do you think about the Argentinian study, Hector Carvalho?
Forget the Argentinian study for a second. Like the original in vitro study, like the green monkey cells, in which ivermectin showed some sort of efficacy at inhibiting SARS-CoV-2 replication at doses like, I don't know, an order of magnitude higher than or normally found in human plasma concentration or cellular concentration when it's used in actual humans. So that study in itself, it doesn't mean that if you inhibit that replication in vitro, that means that it's actually inhibiting like the virus itself, like the viral machinery of replication. It could be inhibiting some cellular homeostasis machinery that's just, I don't know, like killing cells generally, maybe it's just toxic to cells. Like that's why you need in vivo studies, like at least in animals, or they just went straight to humans because they think, oh, it's safe. It's been safe as a deworming agent. Must be
In
safe.
small doses, it is safe. Yeah, I think the monkey cell study shows that it was effective at a very toxic high dose, which were not conducive for human beings. So
Yeah,
while
absolutely.
it does have antiviral properties, but those are at a very extremely high dose, which human beings
It
cannot
could be,
take.
it could be,
Toxic.
cytotoxic properties, antiviral properties. You can kill cells pretty easily. Like a lot of stuff works in vitro. You can just boil them. They'll die. You don't want to do that in vivo. And like a lot of that's been the thing with like cancer studies and cancer drug development. Like a lot of the things are cytotoxic. They'll kill cancer cells, no problem. But then the problem is they'll kill other cells as well, and whatever the dynamics you observe in vitro often just don't translate in vivo, and a lot of those drugs get kind of dismissed in the initial in vivo in animal safety testing, just because they're toxic to cancer cells, and they're just gonna kill those mice. And if they're not toxic to cancer cells, guess what? I mean, if they're not toxic to other types of cells, like the doses in which they're not toxic, doses in which they don't kill the mice, they don't kill cancer cells as well. So anyways, that's a bit of a previous pain of mine in cancer drug development. It's like you get all these great results in vitro, and then they're like, oh shit, again, it didn't work in vivo, it didn't translate to animal efficacy. Coming back to the Argentinian Carvalho study, yes, the favorite study of mine that Bret seems to just blindly trust because he wants to. Like Bret the skeptic, that's like,
First,
the Chinese.
I think
Go ahead.
Describe it like what the study was, carrageenan and ivermectin, so that the audience understands the context in which we're talking.
Yeah, sure. It's an observational study in Argentina in medical personnel, hospitals. And it's Ivercar, I think, is the acronym they use. So it combined, like it had a two-stage design. Basically, it tried ivermectin with this yodacarginin or whatever you it's like
Carrageenan, I think.
seaweed. Yeah.
Seaweed.
Yeah, like it's a natural again, like the Bret and Heather's obsession with natural stuff and like their evolutionary justifications of it, to me they sound again very unscientific. So I think maybe that's what they like about the Argentinian study, or that's what they like about ivermectin. I mean, they state this openly, that Bret thinks because it's found in the bacteria from soil, somehow our ancestors might have seen it, and that's why it's much better in our bodies than a chemical, like a synthetic molecule. Again, like this is what naturopaths and like people who promote homeopathy usually, like the logic that they use. It's not something a real scientist would tell. Oh shit, I'm gonna get so much slack from all these naturopaths, and then anyways, not that wouldn't be the first time. But so the Argentinian study, they wanted to try this combination, the ivermectin and I could never pronounce it, yodacargine or carginin, whatever.
Carrageenan, I think.
It doesn't matter.
Carrageenan,
Carrageenan, cargine. Let's just call it seaweed. And yeah. Bret was like, someone in the comments, Bret was like trying to connect the guy who discovered ivermectin in the soil bacteria from Japan, and carginin is seaweed, and Bret's like, oh, there's like a sushi theme in there, like the sushi roll, like Japan and the seaweed. And someone in the comments actually provided a better line, like surf and turf, which I think it's also pretty funny. But anyway, so Argentina, Hector Carvalho, like, oh, I guess it was his brainchild, that study, tried as a prophylactic to see that whether ivermectin could be, preventing people from catching COVID. So they had first arm of the trial, or first stage of the trial, where, well, that pilot study, where they I think they had like 130. It's always like the numbers. 130 people.
1,000. I think it was 1,000 and
1,000 is total. But like the first stage,
yeah,
the pilot one, they had, I think, 130 people in the treatment group and probably 90, if I remember correctly, in the control group of medical personnel who didn't take either. And the first dosing regimen was very funny because they were given ivermectin every 5 hours or every 4 hours, 5 times a day. So and I think that was like, that study was pretty short. I think it was just 2 weeks. Yeah, I think either 2 weeks or 2 months. I hate this, like trying to, like the exact numbers. Actually, let me just pull up. Why don't I just pull up the PDF of Carvalho? That will take me just ivermectin, prophylaxis, Carvalho, PDF. Oh, there you go. Blah, blah, blah. Pilot study. Commencement of the study. Dosage schedule was repeated 5 times a day for 14 days with food and liquids. Okay, right. So the pilot study was 2 weeks. They gotten 5 times a day, and then they were, according to the study, they were evaluated by PCR to see if they had positive, SARS-CoV-2 or not. And also they had in 3 weeks after, checking if, they what might have gotten an infection afterwards. So, oh wow, I was so correct. They actually have 131 people in the treatment group and 98 people in the control group of the pilot study. And surprise, surprise, 0 people were infected with SARS-CoV-2 in the treatment group, while in the control group there was actually 11%. So it's funny, yeah, 11% gotten sick in the control group. So okay, 0 versus 11 in such a small sample size, okay, it's possible. So then they went on to a bigger study. Like this was the pilot. This was, I guess, like 230 people. And then they went into 788 people in the treatment group, like the second stage, and 107 people in the control group, with pooled between different hospitals. It was a multi-center study between like 3 or 4 Argentinian hospitals. But now they actually changed the treatment protocol to using ivermectin weekly. So, 5 times a day versus weekly. That was for me like one first red flag, was like, whoa, are you sure these are comparable? But okay, let's find out. Did that work? And what else did they? Right, carrageenan application was reduced to 4 times a day, the same total dose, and ivermectin was administered once per week, 12 milligrams. Well, 12 milligrams is like this recommended dose from this FLCCC alliance that, promotes ivermectin. So, right, so between, unless it's carrageenan that's so magical and gives us 0% infection, the fact that ivermectin was used so differently between the 2 arms, with again the same results of 0% infected, to me that's already suspicious. But what's actually the most suspicious is the percentage infection rate difference between the 2 groups, because out of the 788 people taking ivermectin, 0% infected, versus 107 in the pooled control group people not taking ivermectin. Like 58% of them got sick. And in one hospital, in Alberto Antranik Hospital, I am sorry, I'm butchering the Spanish language. So total participants, 730, 600 received ivermectin, and 130 used PPE alone, protection, masks, and whatever. 120 of 130 personnel in the PPE alone group got sick, 92.3%. Like almost 100%, almost all of the people got sick versus 0 out of 600 in the ivermectin group. Same hospital, and wait a second, like we just had 10% or 11% positivity in the pilot trial. All of a sudden, it's close to 100% in this hospital and 58.2% overall. Something does not add up. Like, and Brad's like, this is libel. You're accusing them of fraud. I'm not accusing them of fraud just yet. I don't know, like, is this deliberate? Like, I don't trust these numbers for a second. And I'm not chicken shit enough
because they're too good to be true.
No, they're not. Not because they're too good to be true, because there's such a huge disparity between like the two groups and between the two repetitions. Like the two, like it's supposed to be a very similar population, subpopulation in the trial, like hospital workers, and initially you get 11% positivity, and then later on you get 92% positivity. That's a red flag. That doesn't happen in well-designed, well-controlled experiments. And yeah, this is the open-label, non-randomized trial, and to me, that just screams bias and just utter. I don't know. I don't trust this. Like nobody. And also, like if this was just one study in isolation, you could be like, okay, miracles happen. All right, ivermectin is great. But we have dozens of other studies which do not replicate these findings. Like, hello, where's your basic data analysis skills? You have a huge outlier, and you have like other studies which are more believable or more homogeneous in their findings, and you choose to believe the huge outlier and think that nothing's wrong with it. You, the skeptic who like the Chinese scientists are not to be trusted. Again, like
So
is there anything more I should say?
Yeah, well, I think that because this study, your argument essentially is that because the study has not been replicated, this is not to be trusted. So that I think is a better argument than the what Bret claimed you believed in, which is that you thought that this was too good to be true, which was sort of implied in that Quillette article, which is I think why he thought that you were.
It wasn't. It wasn't implied in it. Like
because we are asked to believe that he says that statement somehow implies a form of condescension and a form of.
But I mean, it doesn't imply it's too good to be true. It implies that I don't trust it. Why don't I trust it? Because of the huge disparity between the two groups, and that it's a huge outlier in comparison to other studies. This should be self-evident. Anybody who spent time analyzing dozens of ivermectin studies, which I hope at least Bret has done, or maybe he didn't, and that's why to him this is a huge surprise that there's been other studies, none of which actually got into 100% or even close to like this percentage, 0% of infected. And this huge positivity.
So are you comparing? Are you comparing the study for prophylaxis with the study for treatment? Because I think is one of the points that he brought up is that you were making this false comparison. You were talking about the other studies check treatment while this study check prophylaxis. So
No,
is that
absolutely
the
not. This is
case?
just Heather can't read. And for some reason, like I'll get to that in a second, but no, I'm talking about just the prophylactic studies, the prophylactic findings of dozens of other studies that have been accumulated on ivmmeta.com or any other meta review, meta analysis of ivermectin, which concluded that overall ivermectin can be thought to have 85% overall, like pooled studies, 85% prophylactic efficacy, which is like a far cry from even 95% of vaccines or 100%, which is like unfathomable. I'm just like, in comparison between the dozens of other prophylactic studies, this Carvalho study is a huge outlier with huge methodological problems, which is not to be trusted. Full stop. Are we, I mean, we are asked to believe this is true. I'm asked to believe this is true. I refuse to believe. No, I don't know. I mean, I don't refuse to believe. I know this is fucking bullshit because I know data analysis well enough and statistics well enough to see fucking bullshit when it's shouting at me from the 4-page PDF with Brett's like, all the methods are there. You can go look for yourself. No, there isn't. Like, methods, just basically 2 paragraphs with what they did. They don't have the methods. They didn't even do randomization or anything. It was all self-reported. Anyways. And yeah, like the Heather's claim is like, those people don't know the difference between prophylaxis and treatment because like the paragraph she quotes, I mean, I do the full analysis of this in the Twitter thread. Basically okay, again, why don't I just quote what we wrote?
Yeah, you can also share the screen. I'll make.
No, I mean, there's no need to share the screen. It's first of all, it's my computer is not on the same like laptop and Zoomer. Okay, so basically, so this paragraph is asking, how does the evidence for the prophylactic efficacy of ivermectin, like previously, it's like the previous paragraph is saying, if you're looking for a miracle drug to protect you from COVID-19, look no further. This is it in terms of vaccines. It's talking about vaccines. The previous paragraph talked about vaccines. Next paragraph, how does the evidence for the prophylactic efficacy of ivermectin stack up against the vaccines? It's not even close. And remember, we don't even know the drug provides any significant benefit, any as in prophylactic and treatment. And the next sentence is, a high-quality study published in JAMA found that in a randomized clinical trial that included 476 patients with mild COVID, a 5-day course of ivermectin compared with placebo did not significantly improve the time to resolution of symptoms. Resolution of symptoms. Only an idiot would not realize that resolution of symptoms means treatment. Like, you think we're trying to mislead you and actually quote what the study is about, resolution of symptoms, and imply prophylaxis? I mean, unless you're just trying to, first you came to a conclusion that that we don't know what prophylaxis means, which again, it's like so dumb. How can you claim that we don't know what prophylaxis means if we have half of the article about prophylactic efficacy of vaccines? I mean, it could have, like, if you're just trying to do a gotcha, like, haha, instead, like, you're trying to prove prophylaxis, but you citing a treatment study, gotcha, you messed up the link, okay, but to claim that because we have a prophylaxis study cited, we don't know what a treatment study cited after, like, we're saying the drug does not have any benefit, prophylactic or treatment, is a complete and utter lunacy. So, and it's basically the sentence that precedes it is explaining that we don't know if ivermectin has any efficacy, any as in prophylactic efficacy or treatment efficacy. For treatment efficacy, lack of proof, here's the JAMA study. Like, basically, when studies are done properly, randomized, double-blind, placebo control, the efficacy of ivermectin disappears. Here's the example, JAMA study. And then we go, the next paragraph. But again, for the sake of argument, let's go with the most generous interpretation of available experimental truth. Blah, blah, blah. The site offers real-time meta-analysis of ivermectin, claims the drug aggregated prophylactic efficacy is 85%. Even if this were true, this would mean your odds of developing COVID while taking Ivermectin are about 6.67 times lower than those of a counterpart in the control group. If you receive the vaccine, however, your odds are 20 times lower. So 3-time difference. A vaccine is 3 times better protective than Ivermectin. So here, we're like, if you actually had reading comprehension, the claim that based on this, that we don't know what prophylaxis means, wouldn't even enter your head. But since it did, we know that your reading comprehension is pretty low. So thank you for opening our eyes that, you're not to be trusted with data analysis or any other pretty much claims that you make, hunter-gatherer in the 21st century. Anyway.
Well, that is the book's name.
That is their
I
book's
came
name.
across
So
this
yeah, they're
claim.
still hunter-gatherers. Yeah. It's time to, start, learning the alphabet and reading books and use a grocery store. Stop being hunter-gatherers. Okay, I'm just messing with them, but yeah, they're like it's so funny how incompetent, embarrassingly incompetent they actually turn out to be. So
I think
it kind of reflects a little bad on the support of the lab leak hypothesis. I'm like, if these are the people who are like supporting me, well, although that's not a high bar. Like Trump himself was a big proponent of the lab leak hypothesis, so it's not a big qualification that they did.
I think that they claim that they don't want to. Can you hear me? I think you froze.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah,
can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can see. Yeah. So I think that they claim that they don't want to debate you because you've been a jerk to them, you've been bad faith, you have.
Yeah, I don't even know what bad faith means. From like, there's like what bad faith implies some kind of ulterior motive. I don't see what
maybe
mine
you're
is.
being
like some people
paid by a
I'm being
Pfizer
paid by Pfizer. Yeah. Okay, like it's as I said in my vaccine Medium article, like in the acknowledgement section, I'm being paid by the Vaccine Manufacturers Guild, who are paying me to spread vaccine, I don't know, counter misinformation, which, no, don't worry, I'm doing it all for free.
You've accused them of being anti-science, of being incompetent, of being nature is good types, anti-GMO and stuff. I'll just read it from your tweet. You said that their podcast has turned into a festival of incompetence in drug development, pharmacology, data analysis, statistics, reading comprehension, and even basic biology. So I think that I understand why someone would take that as a personal attack, even though you can claim that all of those are true, because
this was afterwards. This was after the refusal to invite me to the podcast to actually like defend my position and maybe ask me what I meant, like, because they made so many funny mistakes as well by misunderstanding what I wrote or what I tweeted. Like Bret thought that when I told him that the numbers are fooling you, Bret, because this is not like the Carvalho study is not a double-blind placebo randomized trial. So it, like the implication was it's got huge reporting bias. Bret thought I'm implying a placebo effect. And I was like, no, dude, like what? I'm saying this study has reporting bias. Why would you think I'm implying a placebo effect?
You were talking about the need for a double-blind study in order to have it.
No, I was just explaining. Yeah, it's like because in one of those, in one of his podcasts, I think it was with Pierre Corey, is like, unless the numbers are fooling us, like, yeah, we have like, oh, it's a wonderful drug because the Carvalho study is saying it's 100% effective, ha ha ha, unless the numbers are fooling us. So, I mean, I had that clip in a tweet and I said, yes, Bret, the numbers are fooling you because that study is not reliable because it was not a double-blind randomized trial. And so in the podcast, Bret took that to mean that I'm somehow implying that the effect is real, but it is explained by the placebo effect. And then he goes against like, it couldn't have been a placebo effect because it's mind over matter, blah, blah. I know, Bret, it obviously can be a placebo effect because there's just no effect. Like, you don't trust this shit. This is shit. Because it's got
So,
reporting bias. It's like blatant reporting bias, and like obviously it went over his head. But yeah, so he said
did you try
at
to
me
reach out
before that.
to him politely and privately before all of this exploded on Twitter? Because
Yeah, I mean, if you seem to kind of be maybe half familiar with my tweets. I tweeted this today and the day before. I mean, I started challenging him on this publicly in May when he just had Van den Bosch on his podcast. And so I'm asking, like, Brett, should we address like vaccine misinformation, ivermectin misinformation? And he's like, what misinformation? So yeah, on a number of times, I first publicly, then we had an email exchange, pretty lengthy, and pretty much the same things. Of course, I was nice and polite. We were on very good terms, and even back then, pretty much like we understood that we have different positions and we have to like agree to disagree. And basically, and I offered him at least twice, first to be on his podcast to debate Van den Bosch, then to debate, just in general, to debate him or vaccine effectiveness or ivermectin. And all of the times he's like, yeah, okay, it's a good idea, and he just disappears. Then you know who? Luigi Warren, the guy from technology inventor, he's on the Mrna patents. He offered to go on to the Bret Weinstein podcast on the side of vaccine skeptics, because Luigi is like, we had a pretty big discussion with Luigi as well, who is weary of mRNA vaccines, not as weary as Bret, but he's pretty, concerned about mRNA vaccines. So he offered to go on the podcast and debate me and him and Bret against me or whatever. So I reached out to Bret. I said, hey, Luigi wants to do a podcast. He can be like, he's from your camp, he's from your tribe, and I could be the devil. You guys can debate me. And Brad's again like, oh, okay, that's a good idea. And then he disappears. And that was, I don't know, a month ago. And yeah, I mean, I was nice, polite. I didn't have any reason to be back then to be upset. But then like Brad kept kind of upping the ante on his rhetoric of, oh, vaccines are dangerous and ivermectin is being suppressed. And basically he didn't want to hear any other side or bring any other opinion on his podcast. And anyway, and then he called me a jerk, and I think that kind of gave me a license to not be nice anymore. So here I am. You got another question?
So it was not, huh?
You had another question in there that I wanted to address, but I forgot which one it was, about like the prior history of the interaction on the vaccines. But anyways, so maybe we'll get to it again if you.
Yeah, so it was not you, because I've talked with some of Bret's fans, and they claim that it was you who claimed, who broke the sort of friendly connection, that it was you who was, because of your attitude, Bret wasn't willing to debate you. So that, I think, is not
well,
true.
Maybe he feels that I was the one who broke it because of the Quillette piece, because he thinks
the
that
Quillette piece came much later. I think you tried to debate him before that as well.
Yeah. No. Basically, this is what I wanted to address. That I offered many times to go on the podcast, and Bret, he didn't refuse, but he just didn't do it. And then we put out the Quillette piece, and then I had a few tweets, especially this one, where I basically said the numbers are fooling you, which Bret then cited and tagged me. That was like on Saturday, and he's like, I guess this is you're choosing a good hill to die on, Yuri. How's Monday? And I thought, how's Monday means he's inviting me to a debate on Monday to basically defend that position. So I asked him, oh, are you inviting me to go on your podcast? Thank you, I'd be honored. Monday is good, like between 2 p.m. and whenever. And he replied saying that no, I'm not inviting you to anywhere. You've been a jerk to me. Something along those lines. Like Monday, we'll release our answer to your critique. And I'm like, oh, whoa, okay, I was a jerk to you. So I mean, the Colette piece, I guess someone could see that, yeah, like the language used and the rhetoric and the way it's constructed, maybe
Was a
like
bit polemical.
yeah, but I mean, this is Claire's style, I think, generally, and I mean, it's the voice is Claire's voice. This is Claire's article with my input. I endorse every word of that article. Like I'm not claiming that, oh my God, it turned out Claire said things about Bret that I didn't mean. No, but it's Claire's voice. It's coming from her. And maybe if someone is reading it and imagining it like Yuri saying this, they're like, oh, what a jerk. Because we actually, it's funny because we have this disparity in society between like what is acceptable for a man to say and a woman, and like not acceptable, but like if a man says it, like he's a jerk. If a woman says it, she's assertive. Actually, like it's now turned on its head from before. But I don't want to get into like the social issues at all. But maybe like, so maybe that's what kind of Bret thought that it's from my voice and I'm being a jerk because I'm saying like I'm appalled by his judgment and ethics, which it's a bit of it's a little I guess aggressive, provocative, but I don't know, does that make, like, even if I was saying it, does that really make me a jerk? I'm calling him out, and it's not like out of the blue that I'm a random guy coming up on the street telling him I'm appalled by his ethics. We have a lot of back and forth where I challenged him. He didn't respond. He evaded. He kept saying and actually like increasing the degree of the things that I'm concerned about, like the misinformation that I'm concerned about. And now I'm saying like, I'm appalled by your actions, dude. And he's like, oh, you're a jerk, so I won't invite you on the podcast. But yeah, so that's what happened. But I think in reality, the reason he's not inviting me or any other person with strong dissent in opinion and the ability to debate him, or the knowledge to debate him on those things, that I think he realizes how weak his understanding of these things are, and basically he'll be destroyed in a debate or dialectic, which is so funny. Dialectic is like the Marx and Lenin thing that, when I was growing up in Soviet Union, dialectics was the thing. And like to hear Bret talk about this, I guess it's like his Communist Party parents' roots speaking out. I don't know. So it's just weird. Like, but yeah, if he's after truth, it certainly doesn't seem that way. It seems that he's after his own echo chamber and just, promoting his version of things and being afraid to actually get his, world pierced by criticism and maybe looking incompetent when people more qualified than him go on his podcast and maybe turn off a lot of his audience from him. I don't know.
I think this is the reason why his audience is so combative and in favor of him, because they have not been exposed to an alternative perspective. So they think that there is not a real debate to be had over here. What we have instead is these big pharmaceutical companies promoting harmful vaccines because it's profitable to them. And so
yeah, he's like in the beginning of his podcast, like the 87, that pretty much conspiracy theory shit that he says about like big pharma trying to like make a profit and having the fiduciary responsibility, and that's why they're willing to like kill people by withholding ivermectin from them just because it makes an extra buck for their shareholders. Sounds so bad. Like, anyways. Yeah, well, I mean, his supporters are his supporters. I think in general we have this tribalism pretty much anywhere where people have their little cliques, especially like entertainers or influencers. They have their YouTube subscribers, and those people are willing to step up to their defense if they think they're being attacked. The hit piece, the Colette hit piece by Berlinski and Deigin. And I'm like, what's a hit piece? Like, are we? Anyways, forget it. I think we're already like an hour and a half.
Why did you pull up the credentials, his H index? What was the context of that?
Oh, well, I think basically I've seen this comment a number of times on Twitter that, oh, Yuri, you think you're so smart, but Bret is this celebrated scientist with highly credentialed celebrated scientist. And like one of the comments to which I was responding, was saying pretty much the same thing. For some reason, they're like mentioning Eric and Bret as being these highly credentialed geniuses or something. And I think it's in general this kind of misunderstanding of Bret's subscribers that somehow he and Heather are these highly credentialed scientists, highly respected in their field, evolutionary biologists, that people just assume this and that's why they trust them. And it just couldn't be further from the truth. Bret and Heather are not highly credentialed and not scientists. Like the last time they were scientists were, I don't know, they were teaching professors back at Evergreen, and like the H index is like the objective measure that scientists use to identify who is basically more prominent or more, I don't know, credentialed, I guess, in the scientific hierarchy. Basically, H index is a citation index. How many times you get cited by your peers. So the more often you get cited, the more respected you are, and basically the better your research quality is. And as I said, like beginning scientists should have, like decent scientists after, I don't know, 15, 20 years should have H index of 20, which means that they have at least 20 papers, each of which has been cited at least 20 times, right? So it's anyway, just read it on Wikipedia what H index is. And it's like it gets pretty much exponentially harder to get a higher H index. Like it's pretty easy to get 20. It's much harder to get 40, and it's very hard to get 60. And like in the hundreds are just the top H index of 100 is like top scientists. So I just pulled it up to show that Bret is absolutely, like his H index is 2, and he only published 3 papers in total, I think. So and Heather's is 3, I think. 3 Heather's H index is 3, and she has a couple more papers to her name. And I'm just saying, like, this is postdoc level stuff. This is not a credentialed scientist by any means of imagination. And even I, non-scientist, who is absolutely like, I'm not interested in the academic rat race of publish or perish. I have, I don't know by now, like 4 or 5 papers, and my H index is also 2 because I've only started publishing this year based on the lab leak stuff, because again, I encountered this double standard that scientists won't even listen to your arguments until you publish them in a peer-reviewed paper, peer-reviewed journal, as if that somehow makes it that much more convincing. So I'm like, okay, you want a peer-reviewed journal article? Here you go. And actually, like Rossana Segredo, my co-author, was the one who inspired me to publish in peer review journals, because she read my Medium article back in last April, and she's like, okay, I'm writing this paper for pretty much similar theses about like the lab leak hypothesis. Why don't we just publish an academic paper about it together? And it's like, okay, let's do it. And now we have like 4 papers with her together. So we just couldn't stop. Maybe we'll have
Yeah,
more.
well, I have just a few questions, but before we do
Actually,
that, I just
Can I ask you a question? I'm curious because this is something you mentioned about ivermectin. That I mean, you're in India, and I think
Yeah.
Heather who used this statistics on India acceptance of ivermectin in different provinces. I guess you have provinces, right? Or I don't know.
States.
So she's like, okay, we have this state used ivermectin, like allowed ivermectin, and their numbers dropped, and this state didn't, and its numbers like didn't drop. And to her, this is evidence. And I said, like, just without knowing anything, this is just basically mistaking correlation for causation. But like, forget about that. I'm just curious: is ivermectin really widely used in India, or like, what's the status of it in India, and how widely is it used in India?
It's not widely used. It's used only in the sense where there's mild symptoms. It's one of the things that's used. Fluvoxamine is another. So there's a bunch of drugs, hydroxychloroquine also, which are used in mild symptoms and definitely not as prophylaxis. And it has, like, recently it has been banned, as in it has been removed from the medicines that are given from the prescribed medicines. So now it's not as widely used, and it wasn't really as widely used ever. It was just used for mild symptoms, along with hydroxychloroquine in mild dosages. So it's not like, I don't think that ivermectin has anything to do with the reduction of cases in India. In fact, any doctor you will meet over here, my mom's a doc, she doesn't see, I talked about her about ivermectin, and she says that's not used anymore. So any doctor you will meet here will tell you to get vaccinated and not take ivermectin. Like, that is the thing over here. So that's not the ground reality.
So maybe you should tweet that at Heather Haying, and because she said this is good evidence that ivermectin is effective. Like her,
it's not good evidence. There are just like one or two paper on non-randomized trials, so it's not good evidence at all. It's just
no. Like paper, just the fact her mistaking correlation for causation. She said that's good evidence. Like her analysis of the different states in India, use of ivermectin and rates of new infections, she said that alone is good evidence to ivermectin's effectiveness. So maybe you should.
Well, that is just logically flawed, because cases do rise and drop.
So let's educate Heather on another aspect of basic data analysis, or even like investigating, is ivermectin widely used in India, or is she, again, just misconstruing wishful thinking for evidence?
Yeah, this is totally wishful thinking, but I just wanted to point out that the reason why Bret's credentials matter over here, because he proclaims, Bret and Heather proclaim themselves to be experts in this field. So they're saying that their advice is not just some random podcaster's advice, it's actually an expert's advice. They emphasize on the fact that they have PhD. It's always, in their podcast in ivermectin, they literally say that I'm going to emphasize on my PhDs in evolutionary biology. That makes me an expert. I'm one of the few people who can, that is also how he was being introduced in Tucker Carlson. So
absolutely,
it matters. So he is, first of all, he's not an expert. Like, there's nothing wrong in being a teacher or a popularizer, right? So, I mean, it's okay if you're a teacher or a popularizer, and, I totally respect that. And I think that's, hard, tough job to do. But when you claim something that you're clearly not, that is when the problem lies. And in this case, it is extremely harmful to his audience to, proclaim himself as an expert and giving out medical advice, which he is not qualified to do, and which, as we have pointed out enough, is not something that he's good at doing either. It's not good at
and you're absolutely right. And it's funny that, in that emergency, Saving the World podcast, he's like, and I'm Bret Weinstein, or in this case, I'm Dr. Bret Weinstein. And it's like people are, oh, he's a doctor. And again, this is a thing with like, I guess, American or Western, doctor, like PhD is a doctor, but it's not a medical doctor. It's not an MD. And a lot of people are confused just by that. And it's like, I'm Dr. Bret Weinstein. He doesn't say I got a PhD in evolutionary biology, which, and I got 2 papers to my name or 3 papers to my name on telomere theory. Oh, don't even start me on telomeres. But yes, you're absolutely right that I think we have to, again, be vocal that he is not qualified, not only to give out medical advice, but to analyze ivermectin or vaccines or anything else. That not just because he doesn't have enough PhDs or credentials, but just based on what he already said, which clearly shows that he is not competent.
So I have 1 or 2 more questions. This will be quick. Do you think that there is a linear relationship between the efficacy of vaccines and neutralizing antibodies? Because a lot of people have been talking about increasing their doses to sort of fight more variants. So do you think that adds up? Or what other mechanisms are like?
It's a tough question, and I don't want to pull a Bret Weinstein on your audience and claim that I know. Well, obviously there's no linear relationship, and there's actually a log linear relationship between like the antibody titers and neutralization capacity of those antibodies between like within I guess the same human, but between humans it's a very, like, you can't really compare the like my titers to your titers and say because my titers are higher I'm somehow better protected. That's not correct. But in general, that if I compare my titers to my titers from 3 months ago and I see that they've fallen precipitously, then yes, there are data that suggests that lowering, like a lower titer is less protective. So it might be a good idea to revaccinate and to get our titer higher. Again, this is just my conjecture, because especially for the Delta variant, because it's so much more transmissible, because of the polybasic cleavage site that is now even more polybasic, the furin cleavage site that's been like, I think, the catalyst to the transmissibility of SARS-CoV-2, which in the Delta variant has become even more polybasic. It's gotten another arginine in there, and it's cleaved much more effectively. This is actually, has been shown in many studies that this is what's happening. And so because of that, it seems that it requires a much smaller dose to infect people. So like before, SARS-CoV-2, you needed to be like exposed for like, I don't know, 15 minutes to someone infected with SARS-CoV-2 to also catch it on average. But now with the Delta variant, it could happen like after, I don't know, a few seconds, based on, I've seen some data from, I think, Israel, like contact tracing, that they're saying, oh my God, people got infected after like a short conversation. So I think basically because the Delta variant needs a much smaller dose to infect you, your neutralizing antibody titer needs to be so much higher to protect you from that infection. But again, like neutralizing antibodies are not the only protection, because we have like the cellular immunity that comes in later and kills the cells that get infected, and it's also pretty effective. But basically neutralizing antibodies try to prevent that from happening. So I mean, if you don't have a high enough titer, it doesn't mean like you're screwed. You might still get infected, but if you've been vaccinated, if your immune system's already been trained, or you've been sick before, if your immune system knows this pathogen, it will most likely be able to clear it without you suffering like very bad effects. That's the other beauty of vaccinations, that not only do they stop transmission and eradicate COVID, they also protect people from decreasing the severity of infections and greatly decreasing their risk of mortality. So even if you get breakthrough infections, which of course it's better than if you get a breakthrough infection, you're like, oh shit, why did I vaccinate? I wasted my virgin immune system to getting this vaccine and I still got sick. No, you still get a benefit because you've trained your immune system to recognize this pathogen, and you're probably going to clear it much better with after your immune system knows it, and you're probably not going to die. Whereas before, if your immune system didn't know this, you had a much higher risk of dying or long COVID or what have you. So just because you got a breakthrough infection doesn't mean vaccines are useless or don't work. You still are in a much better position getting a breakthrough infection than getting a naive infection.
You avoid the severe symptoms by getting
Yeah,
vaccinated.
absolutely. I mean, that's also been shown in clinical trials that like 95% effectiveness at preventing new infections, but up to like 99% effectiveness at preventing severe COVID in vaccinated people. Like I'm telling you, these vaccines are a marvel of our science and technology, and having like unqualified people be highly skeptical of them is just preposterous.
What do you think?
No, I'm
mRNA
not paid by
vaccines are more
Vaccine Alliance.
effective?
That was a joke. Sorry.
Why do you think mRNA vaccines are more effective against the Delta variant?
I don't think it's necessarily like the mRNA technology per se. Like the difference in efficacy between, say, the mRNA technology and adenoviral technology like Sputnik or even AstraZeneca is not that huge. I think it might be the difference in the exact spike they encode, and like that it's stabilized in this pre-fusion conformation in mRNA vaccines. But like the mRNA technology is great for its, first of all, that it's very pure, that you're delivering just the mRNA, you're not delivering a virus. It's not like the adenoviral virus does not have to get to the receptor, get inside your cell, start, I don't know, you're just delivering the mRNA, and it's very easy to produce. Like basically once you have the platform, it's like plug and play. You just synthesize the mRNA and you coat it in these lipids, so you can have this vaccine. You can very quickly create a different version of vaccine using pretty much the same production lines, and it's a very scalable technology, cheap technology. Like we have billions of doses by now within a span of, I don't know, 6 months of production, like scale up production. So it's and yeah, like you don't get like secondary immunity. Like one of the things why I chose to get Pfizer rather than Sputnik adenoviral vaccine, because I want to save my virginity for like the viral vaccine for like adenoviral gene therapies, basically because your body will generate an immune response against the actual viral delivery mechanism, like the adenovirus or AAVs or whatever, so that you can't really dose multiple times by the same carrier. That's why in the Sputnik, they have 2 different adenoviruses. Like for the first dose, they have one, and for the second one, they have a different strain, so that if you get immunity generated on the first strain, on the first dose, it does not prevent the second dose from delivering the cargo in your cells. So, but mRNA, I mean, doesn't have that problem. It's just like a lipid blob that can, because of its lipid structure and its tropism to cell membranes, is able to get into pretty much any cells. Which is, on the other hand, is probably like its potential like negative effect, that it's so promiscuous that it gets into pretty much any cell, that if it travels around the body, it gets into your brain and it gets to your ovaries and it can get inside cells. So maybe from that perspective, there's still work to be done to be optimized to maybe have like better localization and like maybe actually completely try to stay, which of course it won't, like not completely, but more of it so that it stays in the injection site. But these are like nice to haves. And basically the safety of all of these traveling around and these promiscuous tropism to other tissues has been assessed and has been deemed to be safe, or at least safe enough to be used as an emergency stopgap measure against the pandemic that is, a danger to killing billions of people if not stopped. Obviously, if we didn't have a pandemic, nobody would be vaccinating with these vaccines and this new technology, just because it's just stupid. Why would you want to do that without a pandemic? Which is actually a great point against the work that's been done by like EcoHealth Alliance and all other like gain of function research people claiming that, oh, we're going to do a preemptive vaccine against SARS-like viruses or any coronaviruses. And like, who are you going to test it on? Who's going to let you test a vaccine against something that is not posing a threat and basically risk the health of other people, where there's just, zero threat that you're preventing? Basically, it doesn't make sense to create preventive vaccines. It makes sense to have the technology like mRNA technology that can be scaled very quickly in the case of a pandemic, but like preemptively trying to, hotwire viruses and then create vaccines against them, it's just like on several levels, it's dangerous and stupid on several levels. Anyway,
Right. So
that's my gain of function hate blob.
I had a fantastic time with you. I do wanted to talk about a lot of other things, transhumanism, and the lab leak will have you sometime on again. Did you enjoy the conversation?
Yeah, I guess it wasn't much of a conversation. It was me just spouting my mouth off. But I love talking about all of these things, and I'm very fired up against the misinformation that's been going on vaccines and creating the vaccine hesitancy, and I'm very like disappointed in humanity, man. That like it's like but like science is giving us these great gifts, and we're rejecting them based on our ignorance and our fears stemming from our ignorance. Like, we don't know how biology works exactly, so why don't we just like assume that you want the worst for us? You want to make money on us, man. You're just gonna give us boosters after boosters, and you actually like, I bet you created that virus to make money on us from vaccines, man. And I'm like, how in the 21st century did we come to this? And not only did we come to this, but this is like being promoted on all social media platforms. This is not about Bret, but like in general, like the dumbest people, the like most idiotic ideas get the most play on not just social media. Like, did you see Fox News? I posted the clip on Fox News. There's this fucking idiot saying like, oh, maybe a pandemic is a good thing because it's meant to like call people, like wipe out people, and vaccines are like interfering with that, man. I'm like, you should be fucking fired on the spot from this television. Like, just like, who are these people who are getting voice in the 21st century? And I'm just disappointed in general in humanity. So now is a good time to talk about transhumanism. But I don't know, we're going back to like anti-humanism, going back to like stupid apes who just don't need to use their intellect, and they're like anyways, I'm ranting. So I had a good time. I thank you for the invitation, and it was always a pleasure to discuss pretty much anything related to biomedicine, medicine, or new discoveries, gene therapies. And I think the future is actually like so amazing. It holds for the humanity of like different gene therapies to delay aging, to reverse aging, to rejuvenate, to basically give us full control of our biology that we as humans have been dreaming of for forever, for time immemorial. And now finally we live in this time where we actually finally have the tools at our disposal to do this, to alter our biology, to let our biology do what we want, rather than be slaves to our biology and kind of have to follow what our genes want for us. So I think it's great.
Yeah,
And
well, it is great. And just one thing before you go, people can follow you. Your Twitter handle is Yuri Deigin, and they can check out your website.
Nah, I'm not into this like self-promotion. Like, oh, and you can find my Patreon,
Okay, cool.
and like if you donate, you can get like an extra hour with me. I'll call you, and I'm not into that shit.
And because you were so engaged in this conversation, and I watched the Bret episode before having you on, and there you were like so silent, and Bret was leading the conversation, but here you were like the very speaker. So great to have
You
that.
mean you watched what? Bret's
No,
episode on Lab
Bret's
Leak?
conversation with you on the lab leak.
What about it?
Well, you were very sort of, I don't know, introverted and silent over there. I mean, Bret was sort of.
I don't
and
know.
very.
I didn't think about that. But I mean, with Bret, I was just, I was a guest on his podcast, and there was I think I was pretty vocal on like some topics, like when I thought we're being misled by, I don't know, scientists, or like Christian Anderson's paper, which is completely, how should I put it, mistaking absence of evidence for evidence of absence. And when I critiqued people, I think I was pretty vocal. I don't know. So I mean, I don't.
No, I think it's good to be extremely vocal in the strongest possible terms, especially in this vaccine thing, because it's literally leading people to their deaths, and we need to do anything we can to stop it. So get vaccinated, and have a nice day.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I guess I'm more vocal. Sometimes I'm less vocal. It depends on the subject. But you're right. This is a very important issue, and I'm pretty, as I said, I'm pretty fired up on like the misinformation and like the things that have been going on that I think need to stop. So maybe that's why I'm a little extra combative. But yeah, thank you for hosting me, and always happy to talk more. And I hope